Good morning, New York. Buenos dias. It's me, Angel Torres, Puerto Rican bush dyke from Staten Island. What's up? How you doing? About to have the meeting of a lifetime on.
Welcome to the Bay Area Women's Theater Festival Amplify Artist Conversations. I am Erin Merritt. I am one of the instigators of the Amplify team, which is a 24-hour performance event that was originally scheduled for Brava Theater for April 18th and 19th, with 70 plus performances by over 200 artists. That live event is, of course, on hold because of coronavirus, but we refuse to allow the need for social distancing to keep us from amplifying our amazing women, non-binary, and trans artists' work. We will be performing a little bit of an online version of Amplify on April 18th. Stay tuned for more details. But in the meantime, we are also interviewing a number of our performers that will be in the live event when it is rescheduled. And today we are in conversation with a very special artist, Tina D'Elia, who is not only performing the event, but is also one of the other instigators of the event. And I've had the pleasure of working with Tina for almost a year to put this event together. We're going to talk to her a little bit about her journey with the project that she's bringing to Amplify, but also just, herself as an artist. And I want you to know a little bit more about this amazing Bay Area theater maker. You can find out more about her work and make a donation to her ongoing work through her Venmo, which is at Tina-Delia. That's TINA-DELIA. This will all be on your screen. And also stay tuned for the rescheduling of the Amplify event, which you can check out at Bay Area Women's Theater Festival.com. That's theater with an R-E, Bay Area Women's Theater Festival.com. And without further ado, hi, Tina. Thank you for being part of the Amplify event, for helping make it happen, and for joining us today. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Erin? I'm thrilled to be here with you. And also thank you, Sherry, for helping set this up, Sherry Miller. I'm thrilled to be here with you and to everyone who's listening. Hi.
How are you coping with being shut up inside when you expected to be out performing?
Right. I feel like it's been an interesting roller coaster of inside. So, and on one hand, there's something that is dystopian and very odd and challenging, because I have to monitor sort of how much information I'm taking in that I want to be, informed of, that's going on. And then I also want to be staying in touch with all these amazing artists. And I love that BAWTF, like that all of us are continuing finding a way to amplify women and binary folks' voices. So staying in touch through social media and connecting. And now it's like Zoom is like, is like my new best friend. If I didn't have Zoom, how would I not, sort of see people? Or FaceTime. And
Zoom, you need to pay for this. You need to be paying for this.
Indeed. And I definitely feel like I'm in the boat with thousands and thousands of people and sort of applying for emergency grants and applying for unemployment and kind of, figuring out all of that, which is really helpful to do in a collective, supporting way, and the sharing of resources. It's like every time I get an email or any information of any kind of support, I pass it on to one person, I pass it on to another person, somebody sends me another webinar. So all those things I find really helpful. And then I just really have to take pause and take stock of the fact that there are folks that are hurting so much more, that are less resourced, communities, homeless communities, and the impact of communities of color and folks already with disabilities, that this is just I just have to take pause a couple of times a day in terms of what this means, because for some people it doesn't mean, sort of quote unquote a death sentence, and for other people it is. It sort of means kind of this is dire straits. So I think what I'm trying to say to you is that it's a lot. It's a lot to sort of take in every day. And one of my friends, who's a fabulous actor and voiceover artist, Rika Luna, has actually challenged me to meditate every day, just to do, which I'm doing, just to sort of try to try to pause. Try to pause. How are you doing, Erin, as well with
I'm
this?
I'm doing all right. But I don't want to talk about myself here. I really want this to be about you. So the only thing I want to kind of add to what you're saying is I,
Yeah.
I notice that a lot of artists are really engaging in, as you're doing, like, yeah, it feels bad to me, but I know many people have it worse off. And I want to acknowledge that, but I also want to acknowledge that artists are already a marginalized group of people who are already working for so little money. And
Right.
and that I'm hoping that this time will allow artists to feel like they can speak up for themselves and their need to get paid. Um,
Absolutely.
I'm hoping that, as the non-artists among us are not, I think everybody's an artist on some level. We all start out being artists as kids, but as the people who aren't practicing artists maybe, or aren't professional artists, are sitting and maybe having some free time, they are turning to entertainment. They are hoping for entertainment, and we are all needing entertainment, right? Whether we're makers or not. And so um, I'm hoping that these interviews will help you and others claim boldly your right to get paid for your work.
I
To
hear
that
that.
you
Yeah.
understand when times get hard, we need artists, and that's the time to understand that artists need to get paid. So yes, other people may have it worse or they may not. Um, and we're highlighting you because we want you to get paid for your work.
Thank
That's what I
you.
would say. So
Thank you.
back to you. Talk to us about your journey of finding your voice within your art form. What brought you to the day that you created Overlooked Latinas?
Yes. So I start this, and don't you worry, it won't be the long version, but let me start with, I was 5 years old, and I understood as a child in the 70s, as a child of a Mexican German mom who grew up for the first 15 years of her life in Cali, Colombia. So my mom brought this bicultural upbringing to our family, and my father of Italian descent. Um, I I had already a strong feminist sensibility about me, and I tried to do whatever I wanted to do, which means walking away from a baby being baptized and walking into an empty church, which a
Ooh.
Catholic church, which is not allowed, of course. I know there's nobody around, and certainly a child, a girl, in around 1974 is not allowed to walk up to the altar, right? I mean, I would be pulled off the altar, but I knew that this was my act of resistance, and this was my act of embracing and finding my voice as an actor, as a creator, as a performer. And I made a beeline. Um, I will also say a Z line too, right up those steps to get up on the altar. It was a very fancy church. So I remember the sound felt like it was sort of almost like a marble floor.
Mm.
And I could perform, I could tap dance, I could give an outstanding performance to my audience, in my mind, that I created out there in the empty pews. That was the audience I saw. So I did that. I entertained the audience. That was one of my intentions, and the other was I was so fascinated by that the microphone and the podium that was so much taller than me, because I'm only 5'2", but I walk tall. So at the age of 5, I was really short, And I knew I couldn't reach it, even though I really wanted to get on that mic. So instead, I acted as though I was on the mic and I was saying something profoundly important and meaningful and connected and dramatic and riveting to the audience. And right there, sort of intuitively, I had given my comedic side, performance side, and I'd given my dramatic performance.
Beautiful.
And after I was finished with what I had to say, I knew that it was time for me to, take my bow and exit gracefully, knowing that I knew it. I said, no one's going to catch me. This has been my performance. I have baptized myself. I have taken back being forced to go through this whole, the rituals of Catholic Church, and had my own baptism, as the stand-up comedian Natasha Muse would say. I baptized myself.
Uh-huh.
And I exited. And that is when I found my voice as an artist.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
I wish I had been there.
Thank you. And then I carried that with me. And some of it was because creatively, my family, we would perform. Like, that was how my mom grew up, that, singing and dancing and playing music, or my mom played the castanets, or there was the drums, and my father actually played the piano. So I grew up sort of performing as just something that I did for fun, that felt like a cultural experience with my family. But though I took that experience of being 5 years old and baptizing myself, it did bring me into, everywhere in school, or sometimes summer programs. I really wanted to perform on the theater. And it wasn't until I did start writing poetry in second and third grade. So that I really enjoyed writing. And I would say, middle school is when I kind of confirmed that, okay, well, I am an actor. And then in high school, we had the opportunity at the Cambridge School of Weston, where I went to high school, to do our own writing and playwriting, and some of the students directed. And so that brought about more of a foundation, which takes me to college, when I felt that I lost my voice and I might have to give up acting and creative writing.
What was the challenge then? What was standing in your way?
So I always knew as a child, and my parents were aware, and my teachers were aware, that I had learning challenges and I had a learning disability. And sometimes with a learning disability, there isn't one name for it. Like, I take a lot of notes, or I draw pictures. I don't do a lot of math and spelling in my head. I write things down. My sentences are on, are run-ons. And I have some dyslexia, but all of that, I had a great butch lesbian, um, uh, lefty Jewish women's studies advisor in college, named Barb, who I really loved a lot. And she said, if you can find out what this name, or find out what these things are that you have, we have services here. This is going to, see if this can help empower and help you get a handle on how to describe, what your needs are as a student, and whether or not whether or not one ever conquers or solves, or just kind of lives with. I mean, that's how I thought that I was going to. I didn't think I was sort of going to conquer the learning disability. I always thought I was going to say, this is what I have, and this is how I work with it, and this is how I prepare. And if I work with a tutor, this is what works for me. And I did feel more empowered. And I had been struggling academically, and then I wasn't. But that was also kind of one of the flags at school that went up, which is, the student needs more help. And I'm grateful that there were specific people that I worked with. Like, I had a tutor who had a tutor who was really awesome, and I would always tell her, I'm like, I just want you to know that it's a compliment that you remind me of Marcy in the Peanuts.
Mhm.
Even though she didn't call me sir, but if she did, but if she did, I would have. She was like, okay, you're not Peppermint Patty. Anyway, uh, so so by being able to have a sense of how to get my studying and learning back on track, and my grades in a better place, I my self-confidence, my path, feeling like I didn't have to give up my creative passion for being a professional actor as well as being a creative writer. And when I felt like I returned to the theater through spoken word poetry,
Oh,
which was really true in my early 20s, even when I moved back to Boston where I grew up after college. That I always give big plugs for like spoken word poetry and slam poetry um, and performance poetry. That's how I came back into theater, and
mhm.
eventually also started writing as a solo performer, and looking and listening to other poets and theater people and watching other solo performers.
Fantastic.
Great.
So, Overlooked Latinas. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Overlook Latinas is my fourth solo show. It is the secret sequel to the Rita Hayworth of this generation. I'm a big stage uh, and cinematic sequel person. I love crossovers
Mm.
because I get attached to characters. One of the characters in my previous show, the Rita Hayworth of this generation, Angel Torres, Puerto Rican Italian, Butch Dyke from Staten Island. Um, time has passed since she was a production manager in uh, Las Vegas, Nevada. She's now married and she's in New York. And her best friend, Karla Garcia, also Puerto Rican Italian. Karla is a non binary Latinx person who
Mhm.
likes a lot of snacks like golden crumb bun cookies and um, walnut crispy dangles. So Angel and Karla became friends when they were young.
Mhm.
Karla used to get bullied. Karla's kind of it felt like a sitting duck. They were always asking like, "What's your gender?" And Karla was
Mhm.
short, but Angel was kind of like the bodyguard. They became friends. Now it's January 21st, 2021, and they've written this beautiful television pilot.
Mm.
And here they are back in Manhattan, back in New York, where they're from. They're no longer in Vegas. They're not in Los Angeles at the moment. They are in New York, and they're ready to pitch this pilot because in the future, NBC is going to just have a huge diversity grant of grants going
Yeah.
out to folks and saying, we want even more content. So
Okay,
they're excited.
I'm going to stop
Yes.
you there because I don't want you to give away anything more about the play, and that's me being selfish. I want people to just
Good.
go watch
Good.
it. I
Okay.
want people to go watch it.
All right.
It's delightful and delicious and hilarious and moving and just a total joy to watch. And there are many other characters in it. Um,
Indeed.
but tell us how you got to writing that. How did you discover these characters? Who inspired you? What people have you worked with? Just a little bit about the creation process of any of your works, but particularly focusing on Overlooked Latinas, which again, everybody, it will be part of Amplify event when we're allowed back in theaters, when we're allowed to see each other again in person.
That's right. That's right. So I always believe as an artist to give props to, you know, all the influences and everyone that paved the way and the shoulders that we stand on. And so I fortunately can remember the distinct moment of being in a queer theater in Boston, the at the Boston Center for the Arts, the fabulous theater, the Theater Offensive, and seeing the African American queer solo performer Pamela Sneed, who's also a teacher and written many, many shows, powerful performer. So it was 1993. I saw her perform one of her shows, and then afterwards, artists always do a class, a free class. So there were many shows and classes I saw through the Theater Offensive. Holly Hughes, who's brilliant, Peggy Shaw, who's brilliant, so many brilliant women. And Pamela Sneed had this powerful impact on me. And then a year later is when I got to meet in person and interview for our queer magazine in Boston, the Bay Times, Marga Gomez. And they already knew I was going to fall in love with Marga's work. So the executive director's sister lent me her car, and she was like, "You can be the chauffeur for Marga, take her to the show." I saw Pretty, Witty, and Gay. I think they basically knew that, I was already working on my repertoire with different artists and people. So the Theater Offensive, with the teacher, Rick DesRochers, and with one of my mentors, Lois Roach in Boston, who I still work with. So here was my opportunity to interview, meet Marga, see her show. And what was great was I can completely see from the first time I saw Marga's work how that had a great impact on my writing, especially because I grew up being so influenced by the Marx Brothers. I studied Groucho Marx. I performed Groucho Marx in one of my shows. So this screwball comedy, really zany, fast-paced way of storytelling, being different characters, having them talk to each other, kind of, was influenced since I was a kid. And then as I saw and studied different people, different great performers that really resonated, I would go back, like there's certain shows or moments I'll go back and I'll see Marga again and I'll be like, I love this moment. I love this moment. So when I moved from Boston, in which I did a couple of shows, to San Francisco, what got me here was in 2011, I had a couple of friends from a previous uh, uh, org that Elaine McGree had helped facilitate, which was called ZSpace Studios in 2000, 2001. And so I had Ellen Sebastian Chang I had met, and she directed one of my Groucho shows. I had worked in film with Mary Guzman, but Mary and I hadn't started working in theater yet. But so I was working with some friends.
Hang on.
One of my friends.
I want to make sure everybody knows who all these people are, especially if you're listening from beyond the Bay Area. So Marga Gomez is a Puerto Rican, Cuban American comedian, playwright. She's this amazing force of nature. And you can find out more about her at margagomez.com. That's MARGAGOMEZ.com. Does this great mix of stand-up comedy and solo show. Just beautiful performer. And formative for a lot of us who grew up here in the Bay Area. Ellen Sebastian Chang, I don't even know where to with Ellen. I don't think she has a website. Founder of a legendary theater company here that kind of changed things, called Life on the Water. And director and mentor to a lot of us who formed our careers here in the Bay Area.
And and that was when I also got to meet and work with Amy Mueller, Anne Galjor. Like there were so many fantastic folks that I was, they would either teach a workshop and facilitate a show and then watch a reading, or I would participate. So what was amazing was I felt like I was surrounded by really creative, strong, supportive folks that I was just building my work upon. And I had so much respect for my friends Eleanor and Andrea Kirchluska and Eleanor, and they said they were like, we really love taking classes with David Ford. And so in 2011, I brought the Rita Hayworth This Generation solo show into David Ford. And what's great about David Ford is immediately, if he resonates with your work, but not just your work, your characters,
Mm-hmm.
he forms an attachment. Because I
Uh-huh.
would pause and be like, you really like Angel more than you even like this protagonist, Carmelita. And then as I started working on Overlooked Latinas with David, I found out like, okay, now you really love Karla.
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, which is lovely, because that's part of the, I feel like, the joy and the momentum of doing the work. So since 2011 to, I want to say it was last year, 2019, all of my work I developed with David Ford, and then Mary Guzman, who we've been friends, I want to say, feels like for almost 20 years. We did some theater work together prior to the Rita Hayworth, but we started working very consistently since the Rita Hayworth of This Generation, as far
Mm-hmm.
as rehearsal process, and then go to David Ford as my dramaturg, have a roadmap, and then Mary and I just continue on that roadmap and create. So
Can I name check them really quickly, or just kind of?
please,
So
please, yes,
David Ford is, I again, like, does so much for the Bay Area and for performers here that you kind of can't. You
yeah,
could go on all day about him, but he teaches classes in San Francisco at the Marsh. Helping people put together their solo shows. And Mary Guzman does filmmaking, and she's also a theater director. Her website is oneof9films.com. That's ONEOF, and then the number 9films.com. Mary Guzman, who is also, just to be completely transparent here, also one of our instigators on the Amplify event, because we're all working together uh, because women don't get to work together often enough, and so we've collected ourselves to work together.
indeed. And I love sharing about my process, because I always want other people and artists to hear that I didn't create this stuff alone. I live with these characters a long time. That's where the roots of Overlooked Latinas came from. And once I have an idea, like, I knew I wanted to look at how the McCarthy era, the Red Scare, the Lavender Scare, Blacklist in Hollywood, that there were subjects and themes that I've wanted to work with. And so periodically I would kind of go into the world of, go into the internets, go into those worlds, and then find what tangent I would head, and what YouTube video I would watch, and is there a book I could see. And then sometimes I would try to fill in the gaps for myself, since I love to create fictional solo performance with fictional characters, and then have historic characters that are typically Latinx. So whether that is Ramon Navarro, Dolores Del Rio, Rosario Ribeletes, Lupe Valdez, Rita Hayworth, um, and sometimes also, even if it's a mention, also sometimes mentioning what I would see as, the villains, or the problematic people too, but typically performing the characters that I want to give an homage to. And often what I find, Erin, that I'm not
Mhm.
surprised about, but I'm really driven in my artwork to put across, is most of the time I find that people will say, "Oh, I didn't know these stories. I didn't know
Oh,
how
sure.
all these people intersected, right? How this, what was happening nationally or globally, what was happening with immigration,
Mhm.
what was happening from a feminist perspective,
Mhm.
and what I can't put together from the work I'm reading of artists. I feel like that's part of also what I celebrate in creating theater, which is I'm creating a version of stories, um, from everything I can put together and from my perspective.
Beautiful.
And yeah, and all that research and all that work is, it takes time, and getting feedback, and going in deeper, and you know, figuring out how I can get at the truth. I also enjoyed the process of research because um, certainly there were a lot of ladies back in the day, like Dolores Del Rio and Marlene Dietrich. And I mean, we sort of know this because of Frida Kahlo and Josephine Baker, but there were a lot of affairs going on, and there was, a lot of relationships between women going on, um, and what happens because of homophobia or sexism is also the erasure of our queer histories and queer women histories, and that's really important for me as a queer woman, uh, and working with a queer director, queer Latina director. It's really important as a mixed race queer Latina working with a queer Latina director to really make sure that uh, that as much truths are out there in the world, and uh, and and not having uh, people's lives be whitewashed. A lot of people never knew that Rita Hayworth was of Spanish descent and possibly Romani descent from her grandfather, and not having people's queer identities and political lefty identities also being erased.
Yeah. Well, and theater is such a great way to just let people into that information in a I mean, I do political theater, I do didactic theater as well, but it's such a great way to just let people get to know a person without feeling lectured to about, here's the information that you weren't taught. We just get to meet these people and go, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think you handle that so beautifully in your shows. I really, really appreciate that. Um, we were getting, uh, originally we were talking about these interviews being fairly short, and I'm not finding that to be the case with the ones that I'm interviewing. I'm just too talky, but I want to hear so much more, but I want to make sure that we also touch on what excites you about obviously the idea of the Women's Theater Festival excited you enough that
Yeah.
you wanted to help actually produce it and make it happen. But mostly, what excites you about performing at Amplify when it comes to be?
I was so just completely mesmerized and blown away with the entire concept to start with, because I feel like there is how should I say, I feel like there is sort of a mainstream world in which um when people just when people hear the word theater, it's just sort of like theater. People get on a stage and they dance and sing, and some old dead white man wrote a play, something. There's a musical, and um, bear with me through my characters. And I was so excited because every time we would discuss an art form and an artist and who we were going to have on a stage and who we could have perform, it I think that was, even when I was young, that's what really really inspired me about theater, was that taking it outside of one form of convention, and the fact that somebody could be working on a brand new piece that maybe they're sort of new to solo performance, or another person has been doing clowning for years, or
Mhm.
um, or is doing a whole other sort of improv piece. I love stand-up comedy. I
Mhm.
love drag performance. Um, I love sketch comedy, and I actually feel like we don't even get to like swim in the day to day in like the incredible amounts of work and talent that people have been spending years and months and blood and sweat and tears and heart
Mhm.
into creating. So I felt like, wow, it's sort of like creating uh like a this living breathing being. I feel like the Brava Theater gets to be transformed into kind of a movement in and of itself, is what it is. It's sort of like where all of us have come from and what we're bringing to this space. And so I didn't just see this as, here is the honor of performing on a stage in a place. I felt like part of it is the passion and power behind Amplify was also the act of what was happening. All the multiple acts of being like, we're not going home. We're not shutting down. We're taking over for 24 hours. This is not stopping. We're going to keep going. And it feels like living, like, well, how could I not take that for granted? Sort of this act being part of this, like experiencing what that is. And the more that I'm just speaking about it to you, the more I keep thinking about, Amplify could be something that I would never experience again in my life.
Yeah.
It's possible. I hope not, but it's possible that before it was created, before, collectively, all these amazing women plus folks coming together and thinking of it, like, right, like there may, at least from what we know, did anything like that exist before here in the Bay Area? And what I love is I feel so grateful to live in an area in which people, they do not just talk. It is like folks are doing. Folks are, it's like, yeah, we're doing, we're creating, we're making, it's happening. And even though it looks different, what we're doing, we're still doing. Yeah. We're still doing. We're still, our voices highlighting women plus folks are happening. So I feel so honored, and I think I always believed that I was like, Amplify opportunity is not gone. It is in another form. Sorry about that.
Hey, what, you have other commitments right now?
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. That was learning from technical worlds of how to shut off sounds. Yeah, so I probably could go on and on about Amplify, but I really feel excited and honored about all of the work that is also happened.
Yeah. Well, so I'd love to close with, unless there's anything else you want to talk about first.
I think I just want to really acknowledge that that you, Erin, and Sherry for helping set this up, and everyone with BAWTF and Amplify, and then like the entire Bay Area, all collectively finding all these ways to highlight artists, keep putting theater out there, keep sharing it. Some theaters for free, some is by donation. All of that is good. It makes me just proud and happy, and it fills me with love and joy. So that was what I wanted to say.
Oh, that's beautiful. I was just going to ask you if you had any closing words, and that is a lovely way to end. So thank you so much. I do think this is it's a challenging moment, but theater makers and societies find their reserves and find what really matters to them, and find the people that matter to them, and the ways that they want to work together in these moments of crisis. So thank you for being one of those people, for bringing so much positivity to everything that you do, and to being such a great team member. As well as a good performer. And thank you so much for joining us today for this edition of the Amplify podcast.
My pleasure. My sincere pleasure. Thank you.
And once again, folks, if you want to support Tina, you can support her through Venmo at Tina, TINA, Delia, DELIA. Because you heard how much research she puts into her work, and you know that it's not just about showing up one night and doing a performance. This is years of work that goes into creating an original show, working with a number of Bay Bay Area and nationwide other artists to make it into a fully realized performance. This is a team sport, theater. So thank you for being such a great team member, like I said, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.